You're listening to the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network. Those of you that are in podcasting, whether it be as talent, as a podcaster, or perhaps as a podcast editor, you'll find value in contracts. No, really, you'll find value in contracts. In fact, you know what? Money is money. Just sign the contract, dummy. That's the focus of this episode of the Podcast Gauntlet. Greetings, everybody. I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Brian Ensminger, the other one of your hosts.
Brian, this is going to be a great one to throw down, discuss, rise and shine inside of podcasting, because I have to tell you, I meet a lot of podcasters, especially podcast editors, that not only do not use contracts, they are completely unfamiliar with how to step into a contract, whether they are providing the services to, say, a talent or a client that they're guiding through an instance, or working as a podcast editor. So I think this is going to be a very valuable episode, especially on the front end of all of those styles of projects.
Yeah, for sure. This is something where I've got some experience, but I definitely don't consider myself an expert. Like, if you want to know what should go in your contract, I can share with you what I've done, but I can't tell you what to do, not only because I'm not an attorney, but just because I'm still figuring it out too.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the things that I want to make sure we talk about inside of this. In fact, I think it's probably easier if we start on that end, which is you don't know jack. Like, you just literally don't know anything. You know how to sit in front of a console and either grab a microphone and start speaking into your chosen platform of favoritism this week, or you're able to grab some WAV files, toss them into an editor, and then puke out some stuff that you can get paid for. That's very often where all of this starts anyway. And the dynamic of what we're talking about here in regard to just sign the contract and get the money, dummy, is it actually works from both ends. When you want people to just sign the contract and get to the money, dummy, when you're providing services, you want it to be very plain. However, remember, just especially for those of you that are not at all aware of contract process and understanding what you're reading, very often the clients aren't either, right? Especially when it comes to capturing podcast content, editing podcast content of any kind, especially nowadays, because it's not just somebody paying you to sit down in front of your microphone or your stack or whatever else. It's not just somebody paying you to take either raw audio that they've captured and edit that. It's now about every single mix of that, including the creation of show notes and a transcript and all the magical things that AI and other talents have now availed for all of us as people providing content services to people inside the milieu. And so this is going to be multi-pronged. It's going to be involved, but the good part is you guys have a rewind button so that if you miss a piece, you can jump right back to it. Or if you think you know what we're talking about in regard to the piece that we're talking about, well, you've also got a fast forward button, so scooch on by. Let's start with the bottom line, though. The bottom line is, let's assume you know nothing. You literally are just that reasonably talented person who wants to somehow jump into this podcast game and make some money. And so from your perspective, if someone was telling you, hey, just here's the money, sign the contract, dummy, always be very careful to read the fine print.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because just like anything else, whether it's your car note or a mortgage or an employment agreement inside of a more traditional style job, the fine print can not only be very devastating, but it can also be incredibly legal, in that you will now be out not only a big bunch of time and money, but probably reputation if you do not provide what you promise. So from the standpoint of you don't know anything and somebody's ushering you quickly to, let's get to the money. Here's the money. Sign the contract, dummy. Be very careful with that, because you can get into a lot of trouble very, very quickly. I think the one that I know scared me the most was I thought that my skill sets were reasonably adept. And so stepping into something that would have a reasonably involved contract, I don't have issues with that. But when you start looking at things like deadlines or overall quality, depending on a number of different factors. Those of you that are listening, you know that you have clients that not only speak well, but my goodness, you hardly even have to touch them in regard to editing.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are those other clients that either they or the people that they bring on that are just guests out of nowhere who have never talked into a microphone before, or they don't speak to people well over a telephone line or whatever that mix is going to be. And so it's filled with the list. Well, guys, it's going to take longer. And very often those things cannot be fixed with a quick snap plug-in push button style thing. There was a thread recently inside of one of the discussion groups that I thought was very revealing, where someone was looking for a plugin that would just do all the magic quick. Is it done yet? Here, I got to push a button. I need to be done right now. And again, for those of you just getting into especially the editing of podcasts, there is nothing insta-button about getting into podcast editing or conjuring of any kind. It doesn't work that way. And so if that's what you thought coming into it, please take the time to stop and ask some questions. You can ask Brian and I anything that you'd like about that. You can go over to our website over at podcastgauntlet.com, fill out that quick web form, and I'm serious. Ask whatever question you'd like. What I always love about Brian and I is that if we don't have the answer, we have such a great network of people that we can go and grab a series of networks and then tether you to those people that will have the answers, and then also help in a discussion, as we always do when we throw down, discuss, rise and shine inside of podcasting. Brian, anything else on the whole I know nothing on the podcast content services creator provider?
No, I would say I think you captured a lot of that really well. One thing I would suggest is acknowledging that you don't know anything. If you're not sure about what you're reading, it might be wise to find yourself an attorney that you can trust. Personally, I find attorneys to be very expensive, but I understand there are some ways to sort of shave some of that off. One of the things that I tend to do as a provider is, generally in the US, the provider is the one who provides the contract that we use as the discussion point. So if you're going to be a provider, I would suggest doing that. It's not always going to happen. Some companies will not sign another company's piece of paper. It just happens that way. And the other thing I think is just to be really clear on what's expected, right? Just like Mike said, and especially if you've had a bunch of emails and phone calls back and forth where you've discussed a lot of things, having that last piece of paper that says, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to charge, this is how we're going to get paid, whether it's for podcast editing services or, as we recently did for another show, entering into an agreement with an advertiser for a sponsorship. What do you expect? What do we get? How does it work? How long does it last? All of those kinds of things, because it's best to know first what you're going to be expected to do, and if there are going to be any requirements on what you're able to deliver besides just as an advertiser having put their information out there, right? Are there minimums, that kind of thing? But the other thing is being really clear. It's the whole green M&Ms thing from the rock bands of the 80s. They would put something in their contract to help them know whether or not they were going to have to do extra stuff. So be aware of what you're being asked. And if you don't understand or you can't deliver or you're not certain, talk to the person you're working with, whether it's an advertiser or a content creator that you're going to edit for. Have that conversation and get the contract rewritten, because otherwise, once you've signed, that's what you're expected to deliver. And if you can't or don't, they're going to expect whatever is laid out in that contract as a result of your failure.
Yeah, I want to pile on a little something that Brian was talking about with the whole green M&Ms thing. Brian's absolutely right. What that also is in there for is to just see if they bothered reading it. Where at some point, somebody, whether it be you or them, somebody inside the process is going to go, ha, that was kind of cool at the green M&M thing. Whether or not it was serious, who knows? Yeah. But the bottom line is that it gets talked about, and now both sides know that you actually read the agreement, which as much as you might think it sounds like insane for somebody to jump into an agreement without actually reading what they're signing onto, guys, it happens every day. There are at least four or five different threads that we find inside of the milieu of discussion
Yes.
groups where they said, I was really eager to get into job X, and well, ... and insert hilarity.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be conveying services to a client that is that guy. So pretty please with sugar on top. If you don't know anything, Brian mentioned something at the beginning of this too, acknowledging that you don't know anything. I'm not a big fan of that. If somebody asks you an outright question, do you know about X, and you don't, then go ahead and do that. But you are a podcast editor, so you have to claim that you know something about podcast editing.
Right.
If they start talking about words or vocabulary or processes that are just way over your head, that's another time that I would absolutely admit, you've mentioned a couple of vocabulary words that I don't know, maybe I'm familiar with, or maybe it's called something different when I use them. Could you explain insert name of vocabulary word? Make sure that you're digging down into those things, because again, there's very large just swaths of what looks like some sort of amoebus yellow marker over one of the many words you don't understand. It's quick, and man, it sure is easy. And while there's cash in your bank account, but if you're stepping into a giant pothole that you literally don't have any idea how to accomplish, be very, very wary of that. Doing things, it happened very much so inside the web design efforts, where somebody would either come along to a project that I'd worked on and they didn't know anything about what they were doing. And so inevitably I'd get a tap on the shoulder where they would say, hey, I'm so-and-so working with thus and such. And well, the website that you made, I got in there and whatever the hell they did to make hilarity happen. And it wasn't so hilarious because they broke the thing, and they likely didn't have a backup, or they've lost the one that I've given them, or whatever the combination of hilarity is. Just know that none of that is fun.
Right.
And so just make sure that when you're stepping into whatever the services are, you are at least somewhat competent in what you are promising to do. Because guys, it'll bite you like a bear trap, and it will bite quick. And there's nothing worse than, well, actually there is something worse than having to give money back. Your reputation going in the toilet is worse. As much as we think, we know of Steve Stewart's group is now, I think it's over 9,000 people that are in there as podcast editor folk. And that's awesome. But just remember that for what sounds like 9,000, I got to tell you, a lot of the people working in that community, it's a very small community. It's right. The ones that are active in generating large pools of either audio work out to people or working on larger programming. It typically is a very small area. And so establishing a reputation is important. Not only is it important, fostering a good reputation is even more a valiant effort than establishing one that isn't bad or a poor one. Right. So again, be very, very wary stepping into things that you either don't know anything about, or worse yet, if you're trying to make things up, boy, this is not the time to do that. There are so many things now that are almost automatic tools that can, you can hit a play button, and if you know your ear right, you kind of know that you completely dropped the entire dozen eggs. It's right. Very black and white, especially in audio.
And as far as the contract, if there's somebody listening right now and you're thinking, oh, they're just trying to pull something over somebody, or they're just afraid that somebody's trying to screw them over as editors, that's not really where I'm coming from. For me, it's about understanding the relationship that's being outlined, who's going to do what, how we're going to protect each other, and making sure that there aren't any surprises, right? So if I do something and I did what I was supposed to do and the client isn't happy with it, if it's covered by the contract, we can still have a conversation about it. It may end up that there's an extra charge. Maybe it's something I can pull off for them quickly and easily, but it helps us understand who does what. So if the client, as an example, this is almost kind of a gotcha, if they choose music that they don't have the rights for and they ask me to put it in their show, and my contract specifies that they're responsible for that and I'm just doing the work for them, and that they will protect me if something comes up, then they're responsible to do that. Now, whether or not they can, of course, like, I'm not going to let them put AC/DC and pretend like I thought it was okay. If they, at some point, you've got to go, yeah, I know this isn't legal. And I'm not trying to get into the legal advice, but this is just going, who's going to do what? And then what's my comfort level with the risk that I have? And for them, what's their comfort level with the risk that they have? Hopefully, there's very limited risk, and we're both happy about the exchange of money and services.
Yeah. And Brian strikes it very well, where both Brian and I are not in any stretch of any word, any kind of attorney or lawyer. and know
Yeah.
anything about the actual processes of these. I'm just speaking from the experience that I've gotten over now, what will be 20 years very shortly in podcasting, the vast majority of which has not been spent with attorneys and or lawyers. I have secured lawyers to do almost all of the middle work processing stuff, especially for my editorcore.com effort, which is where I'm having people come in and edit for me inside of that process. And the reason mostly there has nothing to do with the actual conveyance of services. It has to do with the actual making sure that the services that are being conveyed stay within the editorcore.com business core of work, i.e. don't poach my customers.
Right.
Of the things that I've had trouble with over the now it'll be almost 11 years that we've had Editor Core running. That's been the largest majority of problems. It has nothing to do with Goonie clients or not being able to make people happy. It has everything to do with, I'll get an editor in and boy, they sure do like working on that program. And then they'll tap the talent, the one that came to editorcore.com to get the business on the shoulder and say, hey, I'd like to do your program without the editor core involved. Okay, you're breaking the rules. That's something you're agreeing to inside of that contract. And so again, if you're jumping into a contract where you're conveying services to do a job and then get on to the next job, remember to not dig with a shovel so as to break the agreement that you've got with whatever organization you may or may not be working with. That's great. Anything else that we're missing on the bottom rung layer of either service provider, which I think we're mostly focusing on, or talent?
I think from a very basic level, we've covered it. Obviously, there's a ton of nuance, which is why people make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year advising people. So, right? I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah. And I think maybe between each of these sections is probably just a good idea to, again, call the audience. You guys come and tell us what you think. Go on over to our website over at podcastgauntlet.com. Fill out that quick web form and just put your question in there. Let us know what you're thinking about what we're talking about in any of these sections, and we'll get right back to you. Brian, let's jump into the middle game. There are many people now, thankfully, that podcasting has been around 20 plus years now, that they're deep in the game. They've got a good, either small or stable stockpile of customers that come to them for either services or have come to them for services and then told someone else who also is getting services from them. You may even have it where those people are actually now contracting other people to come in and help them with the workload that they've acquired because of their good reputation, availability, their ability to provide solid content to a good, solid core or perhaps a vein of business inside of podcasting. And so those are other ones where I got to tell you, if you do not have a contract in either direction, you really should. And it kind of stacks on top of what Brian was talking about at the end of our last part, which is it's not just the establishment of a relationship, it's the fostering of that relationship inside of what we're talking about when it comes to the agreement of you will pay me this, I will pay you that. And when there's a problem, something else that you want to make sure that there is a good, solid discussion. Something that I use inside of my process, I'm using an online project manager called the Thundercloud. And inside the Thundercloud is the current status of each of the projects that I work on. And that allows them to kind of look over my shoulder and see exactly what I'm working on. If I have questions, I can either put them in there or save all the questions off inside of that area. And then during a call or a phone discussion prior to the program being released, we can have some discussion time to run through any questions I might have, see what feedback the customer has. And guys, that relationship, the establishment and the processing of that relationship is easily as important. I think it's more important than any money you're ever going to make from that customer, because the better the relationship you have processing the relationship with the customer, the better the process they're going to tell somebody else about, and then you'll have another customer. It has always worked like that, regardless of what vein of industry I'm in. It's working very strongly right now. I'm a professional firearms instructor, and that's what I can visibly see, where if I make one family happy, that family is then going to go tell another family. That family is going to tell two families, and suddenly there's 4 families coming to me for instruction. And so all of this works cross-platform, regardless of what you're working on. It's just a matter of making sure that it's incorporated into what you're going to be providing in regard to services, or what you're going to be getting back when you pay somebody X for whatever it is you want to roll into what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, because there's the contract part of it, and then there's also how we deliver those services, right? And talking about Steve Stewart again, he always talks about how customer service is a big focus of his. I probably don't do as well with customer service as that he does, but that onboarding, that initial conversation, the conversation I have with him about this is what we talked about, this is what's in the agreement, but also these first couple of edits, this is where we're going to decide if what you said and what I thought I heard is actually what we agreed on, right? So having that and the way we've been able to manage that for me has worked out to where, yes, I've lost clients, but I've never lost clients to another editor. I've always lost clients either because I was working for a production company and they left that company, it had nothing to do with me, or they stopped producing their show. So I count that as a huge win because I don't feel personally like I'm terribly good at relationships, but something about how I work with people has allowed them to feel comfortable continuing for 2, 3, 5, 6 years with me up until they either stop or move on. But again, not that direct relationship. They moved on because they changed production companies. They needed more social media management or whatever that company wasn't providing that was beyond the scope of what I do.
Yeah. And I'll jump in and stack on top of that too. I've been in the game long enough that I think I have broken and crashed every single possible relationship style that there is. And, you know, we all grow and we all learn, especially from our mistakes. And I know that I have without question over the years and now decades inside of podcasting. And I got to tell you guys, you will too. You really will. As much as everybody thinks that you learn best when everything's going great, I've got to tell you that some of those very bottom low parts are where I learned really the most, not only about the people that I'm interacting with, but mostly about myself. There's a variety of swings that you'll find inside of that relationship, not only with your customers, but also with yourself, that you will find not only very revealing, but it will help steel you to help make sure that what happened previously does not happen again.
Right.
That's almost another program all on its own, which I'm certain we'll put inside of our master list, Brian.
Well, and I think the other part of that is if your contract is well written, there's a course of action to make corrections, right? The only recourse doesn't have to be for them to leave.
Bail,
right? It can be, I have a certain amount of time to make this right. We'll acknowledge there was a mistake. There will be some kind of, we'll do what we can to make it right. And I think that's the sign of a great contract, is it recognizes that there's a give and take, and it allows for that two-way relationship. And I would also say, you know, we called this just sign the contract, but if you're entering into a relationship as a service provider or maybe providing for an advertiser or something, and it feels very one-sided, like all of the punitive actions are on their side, there's no recourse from yours, kind of like if you're signing up for Facebook or whatever, where it's a very one-sided relationship. I'm not going to tell you to run, but on a personal level, I would be very cautious about entering into that relationship, because that to me feels like somebody who's trying to play chess, and I'm not interested in playing chess with somebody that I'm working with. I want to work together to win. I don't want to have to protect my queen all the time.
Yeah. And one of the neat parts about this program is that you're going to get well, it sounds like Brian and I agree with each other a lot. I'm going to go the other way and tell you to run, to sprint. And it's not because I don't like contracts. It's because people that try to shove things down your throat, regardless of what it is, they do not have your best interest at heart. They don't. I'm trying to think of, I'm serious, like anytime I've ever had somebody try and shove something, especially a contract, down my throat, and I've agreed, it's always somehow bit me, whether it's me biting myself in my own ass because I could not fulfill what was going on, or just like Brian was talking about, they're literally wanting to get you involved now because they need to unshoulder the blame and need to get it off their shoulder onto you. And so whenever, in fact, I've got to tell you, whenever I see something like that inside of one of the discussion groups that you and I are in, that is my default knee jerk that I want to just get in there and say, ripcord. Ripcord is one of my favorite phrases to use inside of something where you need to extract yourself. Remember that a ripcord is, more often than not, it is self-generated. You are the one grabbing the ripcord and pulling the ripcord so that you then escape. That's the concept of the ripcord, is that you can extract yourself. And so if you get involved in an agreement where there is zero ripcord for you, or worse yet, there is only negative detriment if you choose to pull a ripcord inside of the relationship, don't do that.
It's like a cell phone
do not
contract.
Do that. Yeah.
Right? You buy this phone, and if you leave 1 day short of 2 years, we're going to charge you the full amount for whatever discount we gave you. That's a very one-sided relationship. It's intentionally punitive.
Right. What I think this is probably a good part, because this is where I also see the initial tethers of other contracts, especially inside of the radio world, being thrust into something like podcasting. Something else, I think Brian and I have felt it out enough that I think we're probably aligned, but I know that I am not aligned with many people where they think that more of the radio stuffs should be bleeding into podcasting so that it can become more mainstream, and then more people get on it, more people will listen, and everybody will win, right? Wrong. I do not agree with that, and I've never subscribed to that. Podcasting is not only its own thing, it has pioneered its own thing and continues to pioneer its own thing, and does not need to latch onto things that were. It needs to continue pioneering things that other industries latch onto and ride as an industry itself. I don't know how more succinct to put that, but let's focus on the contract. The contract sets, I see lots and lots of things that had their original roots inside of the radio industries that are now spilling very quickly, especially in regard to listenership. And I am not a fan of any of that. I think it's a disillusionment for the podcast industry, but more importantly, it's that blurring of line between radio and podcasting. Guys, it's all the same, right? Wrong. It is not the same. Do not let people tell you that radio and podcasting are a one-to-one relationship. I haven't been able to dig into all of the numbers and details of how to tell you why they are not one-to-one. That's probably another program to put inside the master list, Brian, but don't let something that was used somewhere over here, and then they go, okay, everywhere you see the word radio, just kind of cross that out and put in the word podcast or podcasting or podcast services. Do not do that, because they are not a one-to-one thing simply because they're happening with a microphone and something in your ear or somebody listening to something. They are not the same.
No. And, on a personal level, I don't mind radio people coming in. I think it's great to have more talent, but I love that at least right now, pretty much anybody can do it. Now, that does come up with its drawbacks, right? There's always the risk of additional legislation because somebody went rogue. I'm not a fan of that, but I love that they can coexist. On a personal level, I don't think that I would ever be interested in signing a radio-style contract, but I don't know. Because you know what? I've never been offered one, and I'm okay with that because I like editing for shows that I care about, hosts that I care about. I don't want to be a butt in a seat for somebody who's just delivering a service. That's my perspective. You don't have to subscribe to that as a listener.
Yeah. The concept of being paid to podcast, I've tried that several times and I've liked it several times, but it was because they had a traditional sponsor that was getting the very positive splash damage of what's available inside of podcasting that simply does not exist and has never existed inside of radio. Anyway, that's a different program. Again, any questions inside this second layer of information that we're talking about, make sure you guys chime in over at our website. Again, that's podcastgauntlet.com. Fill out the quick web form and let us know what you think. Okay, Brian, on to the last sector. The people that have been in the game the longest, the people that have the most skin in the game, the most experience in the game. Guys, if you are not using a contract, and very often a contract that has either been read or actually compiled by an attorney and or lawyer, you are likely doing both yourself and your clients a complete disservice. And very often when it comes to being the service provider, you are likely very much in the way of lowballing your talent. People that have been in this game a good solid long time have not only that venerable experience they can use to shunt and get more money because of the level of quality of service they can provide, but they have that experience. Never sell yourself short on experience. As much as you might think all the new people are the people that are going to have the most recent knowledge and they're far smarter than you are, never let experience be something that drags you down like a boat anchor, because it does not do that. What you also have to have at the same time, on the other side of the pendulum, you must continue to have that eager, ongoing, perpetual student mindset. You have to be willing to learn new things. Even if you don't become the expert of those things, you have to learn about them so that you can incorporate them into the folds of the different things you're going to be putting together in regard to contract and services conveyed. I think one of the best ones right now that I can think of are the giant, completely exploding listings of AI tools that are available inside of the podcast industry, whether it be show notes, the actual compilation of a audio podcast program. How about the compilation of video content in regard to podcasting? There's at least 4 or 5 different programs that Dave Jackson and a number of other people inside of podcasting have talked about, where you can have these giant sections of video, and with several push buttons, you now have 20 different short videos to share wherever you'd like. Whether they work or not, I have no idea. But the bottom line is that all these new tools that, if you are experienced inside the industry, you likely know either very little or you know nothing about. You got to be willing to get your feet wet and learn something about them to know if that's a service that you'd like to try and make available and you want to learn more about it, or you try and find somebody else that does that can be folded into your very extensive experience listing. I think I found probably the most value doing that, not because I didn't want to learn about something. I find myself very eager to go and find a new way into something that is a new technology that I can fold in. Guys, it's just frankly about time. Mm-hmm. There is one Mike Wilkerson, and I simply can't do all of the editing that I need to be doing for not only my own stuffs that are continually growing, but also the stuffs that I have for clients that are either legacy clients or ones that I acquire through the editorcore.com program. And so, again, never let your experience be a boat anchor, but you must have that incentive on the back end to be a perpetual student.
Yeah, I love that. And there's really 2 things that stood out for me. One is the conversation about you're not doing yourself any favors if you don't use contracts. On a personal level, I am disinterested in working with anybody that doesn't want to have a contract in place for their protection and for mine. And that for me is a huge red flag. It's probably a bigger red flag than somebody trying to shove a contract down my throat, like Mike referenced earlier. Mm-hmm. Both of those are pretty scary to me because of the potential implications. The other thing is really on this AI bit. And I think that's a wonderful thing to talk about, getting more experience, understanding the nuances of how that works, because it can be a valuable tool, and also understanding the implications if you use those tools for your clients. Are there implications about their content becoming part of a training data set? That's a conversation you need to be qualified to have with them, I think, because it sounds like the law is lagging behind development, as you would expect. And so some of that stuff is probably gray and may be gray for a while. The other part of it is, from a copyright standpoint, it sounds like, not an attorney, it sounds like AI generated content may not be copyrighted. So if you write something for your clients and it's AI generated, there's a chance that their show notes or their clips or their video, if it was completely edited by AI, may not be able to be copyrighted at some point. I don't know. So just something to be careful with. On a personal level, I use some AI tools, but I don't, even for writing and stuff, but I don't publish what they put together. I take what the AI has pulled out as potential stuff. Maybe I take some suggestions and then I rewrite it. Every once in a while, I might publish something word for word for one of the shows that I co-host as this is what AI did, just so we remember that AI can do some stuff, but also it kind of sucks. And that's why we have to have, in my view, people at the end of the chain going, that's a good idea. Let's actually make it work. So I think staying up, not just on being able to use the tools, the time savings, but also thinking through what are those implications for your client and being able to educate them. And if you happen to take a stance and say, I am not offering discounted services by using AI, I will offer a premium service. It's 100% human generated, sort of like the non-GMO promise of some health foods or something like that. Just understand that that's going to cut off a segment of your market. That's okay. I don't know why I've got my editor hat on today. That's going to cut off a segment of your market. But from a contract standpoint, you need to have that conversation. You need to spell out, what do I do and how do I do it? That's actually something that I need to get updated in my contracts now that I'm using some AI tools to help me start generating content. Again, don't take it verbatim. I don't. take it verbatim. I do sometimes use AI clip generators, but that's to find spots that I'm interested in. I don't use the clips. I make my own because I like what I do better, and I'm proud of that. Mike?
Yeah. There's still so much more to talk about, and again, we're approaching a 35 minute plus episode, which is very rare inside the Podcast Gauntlet.
It is.
But all of this is incredibly vital. And more importantly, there's one person that can make sure that what needs to happen will happen inside of your own relationship. It's you. As much as we all want to be able to tap somebody else that is some professional of insert title of whatever they're professional of, I do want you to go and tap those people. But remember, the only people that can make that happen is you. You have to be willing to jump into the concept of having contracts, whether you write them, whether you get a series of templates that are made available in whatever way, whether that be AI or inside of a template complement that you get by subscribing to a service or a coach, or however you get those templates, please start using something in regard to contracts. Remember also, when we talk about contracts, all contracts are not, 37,000 pages of the Warren report. That's not what all contracts look like. Several of mine are 2 pages long. They're a front and a back. And the reason they're a front and a back is because I want the text to be large enough so that if the people that are connecting with me happen to be older, they can read it comfortably and not have to go and stick that shit under a microscope, to be quite honest. The reason I did that is simply because I know I hate that. I hate it when I go someplace and the fine print, or not the fine print, even just the print, is so small so as to make my eyes hurt even with my readers on. I don't enjoy that, and I don't want that. I don't want that experience coloring the crafting of a relationship with either a client or the people I'm conveying services to. I've never had somebody say, "My God, this text is huge. Would you mind shrinking that a bit for me?" I don't have conversations like that, and I'm proud of that. In fact, my attorney said we should likely do that because he asked me, "What are the ages of the people that contact you?" And I said, "Well, very often we're going to have people that are in their 20s, but I've had people that are into their 50s contact me about being a member of the editor corps to edit for me." And so I want to make sure that I'm catering to the people that not only want to do business with me, but they'll see that I want to do business with them as well. There are so many little nuances inside a business relationship, especially conveying services inside of podcasting, that I know Brian and I could probably talk for yet another 35 minutes. But inside of this episode of the Podcast Gauntlet, it shan't happen because it's time to hear from you. Let us know what you think by going again over to our website. That's podcastgauntlet.com. Fill out the quick web form. Let us know what you think. Until next time, we'll throw down, discuss, rise and shine in podcasting. I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Brian Ensminger, the other one of your hosts.
Thanks for reading through our contract to listen to this episode. And we'll see you next time.